All right, let's talk about Umbrella Academy 2. What a fantastic sequel to Umbrella Academy Season 1. It's just so interesting. I love that there is basically no time between Season 2 and Season 1. Like, it literally picks up in the thick of the world-ending events of Season 1. Now, I went into this show late. I watched all 3 seasons just this year, so it was really exciting not knowing that there was going to be this big time travel plot, and the whole season is centered around that. They're not constantly jumping back and jumping forward. There are serious stakes and consequences to them traveling to the past. And we sit with those characters in the past for quite some time. I also like that the way they handle time travel here is with great consequence. It is consequential. As much as I loved Endgame, I feel like since then, the way the MCU has handled like multiverses and time travel has been really frustrating because it starts to feel like all these different dimensions and all these different timelines they jump into don't really matter. There's like one sacred timeline and the rest don't matter, and it doesn't really impact the future. Whereas in this one, it is to an extent following Back to the Future logic. If you change something in the past, it changes the future in very cataclysmic ways. And I love that that's explored through Allison in season 3. The way they mess around with the past, she starts to enjoy this version of the past, and she is denied that in the future. It's just so fascinating. I also love the choice to use number 5 as the character vehicle. I think that's really interesting because normally in shows what you do is the audience surrogate is the most underpowered character, at least initially. Normally you're following someone who's learning about this world and learning all these new things. But in the Umbrella Academy, number 5 knows the most, next to Reginald Hargreeves. He knows the most about like interdimensional travel, time travel, about the future coming events. Like, he is the most well-versed, yet we follow him in season 2. And it's really interesting because the reason we're following him is because even though he knows the most about time travel and the apocalypses that are coming, he knows the least about the actual family around him because he's been away from them for so long. So as an audience vehicle in a show about a family, it's really effective because you have to kind of like be brought up to speed yet again with the family dynamics, with the new family dynamics, because not only have these characters been like sent back in time, but they've also been dropped in different points in time. So some of them have been around for like 3 or 4 years and built new lives and been married, and other ones just got dropped off. And number 5 is the last one to be dropped off. It's just so cool. It's so cool. I talked about how in the first season, I really appreciate how this show just goes for it, goes with these really wacky ideas. And in season 2, they are just like swinging for the fences and going with these huge heady ideas. And I appreciate that the show really respects its audience and doesn't often kind of like dumb exposition explain a lot of things away. And when they do, it's really effective, specifically with the grandfather paradox explanation. Really fascinating. On top of that, even though these are the same characters from season 1, we've got tons new stuff to learn about them because they've built lives in the past. So Allison, for example, she's the same character, but she's also a completely new character. She now has a husband. She's dealing with civil rights issues. Incredibly fascinating. I love the moment she gets dropped there. There's like this instant panic that sets in that wasn't quite there in season 1. I also love that Klaus is like a cult leader. I think Klaus is at his very best this season, and I love the way his relationship with time travel works, the way he'll just go up to people and tell them who they're eventually going to be and what they're eventually going to become. It's really interesting because I feel like normally in time travel shows, everyone's really concerned about maintaining the order of things, and it's really refreshing to watch a bunch of characters that are really loose with this stuff. Even 5, who is setting all the rules and sees all this for what it is still kind of like playing with future events and doesn't really have much regard for kind of like preserving any specific timeline. I also think the commission stuff this season is way more interesting and way more fascinating. Minus one thing, I think the only kind of like downgrade in this season is going from Hazel and Cha-Cha to these random like hot Swedish guys. I think the issue with these Swedish guys is, yes, they're very menacing. I like the choice to make them really clinical and cold assassins compared to Hazel and Cha-Cha, who could get a bit distracted and a bit silly goofy. However, I don't think there was enough there to make them really interesting characters. And I think if you're going to just have them be these cold menaces, we actually need less time with them. I think the scenes with them on their own, minus one or two, were just really slow and hurt the pacing of the season. On top of that, a lot of our characters have really interesting lives and love lives. So we get a whole range of new characters that are related to our main characters. They now have families, they now have cults, they now have friends, and it's really fun to like learn what these characters have been up up to for a couple years. I really appreciate, because we're following the character 5 throughout all 3 seasons, basically the events of this show have taken place over like a month max for him. I think season 1 was about 10 days. I think season 2 was like 10 to 14 days, if I remember correctly. And season 3 is the same. So even though in season 2, a lot of characters have been around for a couple years, for him, it's still that like structure. Really like this season. I love the effects are great. The pacing is great. A lot of storylines are beefed up. A lot of characters are really well substantiated compared to season 1. There are still a few characters that I think are a bit clunky. I also love the way that we get origin stories for like the world that Umbrella Academy is in. We start to learn about Reginald Hargreeves' kind of like impact on society, the way he was experimenting with gorillas, where Pogo came from. These are questions you kind of had in season 1, and it's really, really awesome that season 2 doesn't just feel confined to its season. It feels like it's branching in both directions and trying to substantiate season 1's story and season 3's story. I think if you go back and watch season 1 after watching season 2, it'd be a really fulfilling experience. Now, let's go character by character. So let's start off with the Umbrella Academy itself. Let's just go in numerical order. Let's start with number 1, Luther Hargreeves. Yet again, I think he's one of the worst characters of this show. I think by season 3, they actually get him perfect, but this is still that really awkward spot they have him in, where they sometimes want him to be this stoic, cold leader, and then they'll randomly have him break that to be really silly, goofy. And I don't think the actor or the writing, it's one of the two, but the comedic moments just really didn't land for me. I constantly found them a bit embarrassing, and it really sucked me out of the tone. You know, normally he's in these really serious scenes and he makes these goofy jokes that it just throws me off of what I thought his character was meant to be. And I consistently find him a bit of a frustrating character. However, there is one excellent scene this season with Luther that I really appreciated. It was the scene where he's working with the guy that snapped all the photos of them when they first landed, the guy that they're sort of keeping hostage. They're living in his like building, and they are both drunk, I believe, and they're both going through their collective traumas. And I really found that interesting scene and really appreciate it, because you get insight that maybe Luther is a bit more darker and a bit more damaged and has a lot going on that previously the show hasn't channeled and hasn't built upon. And I spent the whole season kind of waiting to figure out how Luther felt about the fact that the moon exploded and he used to be on the moon, and maybe Reginald Hargreeves always knew that was going to happen, and what does that mean for their relationship? Basically what I'm getting here is I wish we got more good, rich characterization with Luther. He's always just felt a bit thin to me and a bit clunky, and minus a few scenes here or there, he's just never been the character I want him to be. I've always wanted to find out how he feels about his gorilla body, like how he navigates through the world. And I know a thing I've said I appreciate about this show is the fact that they don't exposition dump, and a lot of it's just like meeting these characters at this point in their lives. But I wish we got a bit more, especially showing up in like the 60s. Like surely that would be like an insane thing. People would be like, what's going on? Like I wish we got more with Luther. Throughout all 3 seasons, I think he's been one of the most disappointing characters. Anyways, moving on. Moving on to Diego. I really like the stark contrast we get here with Diego. I love that we meet him in a mental asylum. I love his relationship with Lila. By the way, Lila, what an incredible new character. But yeah, I really like the way we are introduced to Diego here. His action scenes are excellent. He's a lot more of a rich, substantive character this season, and I find his like sense of betrayal and ties to Lila like really fascinating. He's a lot more sweet, a lot more earnest, and a lot more complicated and fleshed out than he was in season 1. Now, I did like how cold and savage and like powerful he was in season 1, but I think their approach in season 2 is probably the best Diego has been for me. It's the most invested I've been in his character, and I think it's really good, especially compared to what they do with him in season 3. I find season 3 Diego really boring and disappointing compared to what he was in season 2. Next, we have Allison Hargreeves. I absolutely love Allison this season. Just so good. There's so much interesting stuff going on with Allison this season. A lot of her stuff is tied to civil rights movements. It's really fascinating, like really great, really well done. They spend a lot of time on it too. This isn't just like shoehorned to pat themselves on the back. Like the show really explores these subjects in a way that the graphic novels never even bothered to touch. This is a great example of something something that can be achieved in the long form TV show format compared to a graphic novel. The graphic novel was never going to have time to explore subjects like this in a bunch of rich depth the way the show can. And it's the show firing on all cylinders. I love the way this show really works with time travel and really explores the ramifications of time travel. I think it's so well handled. I also love her conflict here, right? Like, she's got a new life that she wants to hold on to. Why would she want to leave that? Why would she want to return to the Umbrella Academy and jump forward? I think the conflict is really well built up here. And again, I think the way she is in season 3 is actually all set up here and directly informed by season 2. So yeah, really like what they do with Allison this season as a whole. I think she's one of the best characters this season. I also love that we get a great payoff towards the back end of this season with her powers, where she asks one of the Swedish brothers, one of the Swedish assassins, to kill the other Swedish brother assassin, and it's properly horrific. Like, it's really horrific. I love that this show really held off for a while to show just like the gravity of her power in full effect, but it's properly mortifying. I also love when she has to explain to her new husband like the powers, the apocalypse, all of this stuff. I think Allison is just excellent this season. Next, we have Klaus. Wow, 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 wow. I love Klaus this season. I love that he's a cult leader. Of course he's a cult leader. Of course he's a cult leader. Super interesting. And funnily enough, even though this felt like a weird side gag at first, it actually like really informs his character. There's a really interesting scene later on where we find out that he's been sleeping with the cult members and they all have this like daddy complex with him. And it says a lot about Klaus that he would engage with that, knowing basically like future context for how cults are and how manipulative they are. Really, really fascinating is basically my point. I'm not saying Klaus is an evil piece of shit, but it is like interesting. It is important to note. I also love the way he basically goes after his love interest from the Vietnam War in season 1, I think it was. He goes and finds him and tells him that like his favorite book is going to be Dune, tries to basically start their romance early and tells him not to enlist in the war. I love that scene where the love interest dad basically gets him to commit a hate crime against Klaus. Really fascinating. I wish that scene was a little less rushed. It felt just a bit quick. And the reason I say that is because I should have been absolutely devastated and floored, but I think it all happened so fast that it didn't quite hit my heart the way I wanted it to. But on paper, a great idea. Love everything they're doing with Klaus. I love the way he doesn't really give a fuck about the ramifications of spoiling people's future lives and like messing with the timeline. I also really love his interplay with Ben this season. I love that Ben starts being disobedient. I love the season where Ben takes over Klaus's body. Again, this show doesn't really like throw things out there and then forgets them. It feels like this show is constantly building, and the evolution of Klaus's powers and Ben and Klaus's power struggle is really fascinating. So again, another character I thought they absolutely knocked out of the park this season. Next, we have number 5, easily the best character of the show. Just again, such a great concept. I always love him. It's a great performance. And I really love that they flesh out his relationship with the commission here. I love the commission lady, the leader, and their interplay. I love his fight with Lila. Just so much interesting stuff going on in this season. Just like really, really good. I love that he's basically still working with the commission, even though he's working against the commission. And he makes a deal to knock out that entire boardroom to get the commission lady back to power. Just super, super fascinating. It's also really interesting. I've been trying to get my head around the commission lady's plan, right? Because she basically says, yo, number 5, I will give you a briefcase if you knock out all these people, which basically the briefcase gives 5 the power to try and stop the apocalypse, right? Which is something that the commission lady does want to achieve. So it's really strange to me that at some points the commission lady actually helps out number 5 to stop the apocalypse, even though her end goal is to bring on the apocalypse. I guess it's just sort of like she'll worry about it later. Like, okay, I've made a deal, I'll get into power, and then I'll get 5 again. I just think 5 is a great character. He's really consistent. I love that he's still just super focused on his goal and trying to get the Umbrella Academy to unite. I love the desperation that we see towards, I think it's like episode 7 or 8, where he has that initial setup plan promise, that like little time window to get them all to a different point in time, and they all need to meet in that one spot, and they all let him down. He feels like a disappointed father. Again, just really great characterization. And I love that he's consistently the only one everyone really focused on like saving the day and preserving the timeline. Really, really fascinating. Next, we have Ben. I think Ben is probably the best this season. Here's another character I think they really dropped the ball on in season 3, but here, I think he's excellent. I really like that he starts beefing with Klaus. He starts, ducking out of fights and letting Klaus get beat up. I love all the revelations that he can take over Klaus. I really like the closing to his story too, where he meets Victor in kind of this like purgatory ether, like evaporates and leaves a message for Klaus with Victor. Really, really fascinating. Really enjoyed it. All right, next we have number 7, Victor. All right, this is my hottest take. I still do not love Victor this season. I like Victor the best in season 3. I think Victor in season 3 is probably the best they've been, but my lord, in season 2 was Victor not really working for me at all. I wanted this to work. I wanted this to work so bad. First off, I never love when characters are going through amnesia or memory loss. I get in this instance why that would be the case, but it's just sort of like a bit like, okay, so this isn't really the character we knew. I've just never really agreed with the way the show looks at Victor, in my opinion. I think Victor really needed to be treated as an apocalyptic threat in season 1, and it felt like by giving Victor amnesia, it was almost the show sidestepping any moral responsibility that Victor would need to take on. I was very relieved when it turns out Victor ends up learning what they did in season 1, the fact that they ended the world. But yet again, I think this show with Victor just never really wants to interrogate the idea that they are a ticking time bomb. And I find it a bit frustrating and a bit disappointing and like just strange. I think that's my hottest take for the entire series. Even though I think Allison is really, really nasty in season 3, I think there is something to be said about what Allison says about Victor and the fact that the group never really challenges Victor or punishes Victor or never really like holds them accountable, and they're all bending to the whims of Victor. I have also found that frustrating. And I think this is further exemplified in the relationship that Victor has with Sissy. Now, again, this might be a hot take. I don't know. I don't think the husband of Sissy was that bad. You tell me what you would do if your partner of like, what, a decade or two starts cheating on you with someone else that's just shown up, is really weird. They're also exacerbating your son's struggles, and your son's having these seizures and passing out, and your wife's also planning to leave you for Victor, this person you thought might be a spy, which was a big deal at the time. Like espionage and secret spies is like a big deal back then. So even though I don't think the husband was perfect, he did go to strip clubs, he was a bit emotionally unintelligent. I think the fact that the show framed him as this villain that just like deserved to die was a bit strange. Like, yes, he probably could have handled certain things towards the end of the season a lot better, but I don't really have a bunch of empathy for Victor and Sissy in this situation, just because I can get behind like an LGBT love story. I actually think the husband is seriously fucked over. Like, actually put yourself in his shoes. Like, rewatch season 2 and imagine it from his POV. Like, fucking insane. Like, you'd be like, what the fuck am I going to work for just to get home and get cheated on and get my son taken away? Like it's insane. It's insane. And the show never really interrogates Victor on this at all. And the guy just gets shot. Like, in my opinion, Victor is a serious disruption to their lives. On top of that, Victor showing up to the meeting in episode, I think 8 it was, with number 5, and demanding that Sissy and Harlan come with them is insane. I cannot believe after exploding the fucking planet that Victor had the audacity to be like, yo, let's completely mess with the timeline and just like, just cause a total cataclysmic disruption because I have the hots for Sissy and I want to look after her. Insane. Also, on top of that, I don't particularly like Victor's power set in terms of how it applies to action scenes. I've never liked action scenes where instead of really exciting, fast-paced hand-to-hand combat, it's just people with like magic, vague beams shooting out of their body. This is something we get a lot in the Umbrella Academy. It's also something that's started to plague the MCU. It's like, instead of fights with stakes where you can really tell that people are getting hurt, you can tell that people are getting drained, it's just life force, it's just energy, and like fights are just people standing still with a bunch of CGI making them go like, ugh. I hate it. No one is ever going to watch these scenes again and be like, wow, that was such a great, well choreographed action scene. I'm getting really tired of it. And that's like one of the big things at the end of this season. It's just Victor getting in a field and just like kind of exploding. It's like even in The Boys, I really like The Boys, but Soldier Boy's power and Starlight's power, where it's just like vague energy, I've just never liked it, and it becomes a massive problem in season 3 with Victor, with the Kugel Blitz, with all these other powers, where it's just people standing there going like, I can't hold it, I can't contain it, and it's like, what does this mean? Like how am I meant to find this intense or captivating when you haven't really given me any visual indication or any really storyline about how these powers work? I've never liked them. Never liked it. I do think Elliot Page is a really good actor, though. I do think they crush it in the role. I do think they give a really complicated, tortured angle to the character. That's not my issue here. I think Victor's a really fascinating character, and I really like the position they're in season 2. I just think the show and its tonality and the way it chooses to focus its time, as well as what the characters say about Victor, has never felt congruent with what I am witnessing. It's always been like Victor is this angel that can't be touched and everyone needs to like help out and support. I've just never quite understood it. That might be me being jaded, but like, yeah, whatever. All right, next we have Lila. Absolutely banger of a new character. I love that Lila is around in season 3. Just so good. So fucking good. Like, just a great new character, and it's part of the core cast. It's not just a new side character that pops up for like 4 episodes and then they kill off and like whatever. She's now a main character. She is an important part. She's in the posters. She's part of the Umbrella Academy. I love that her mum is the commission lady and then it turns out she's adopted. I love the twist at the end that Lila is actually part of the Umbrella Academy. Like, she has powers. She was born on the same day. This should have been really obvious. Like, I should have seen this coming the whole season, but I was pleasantly surprised. I also love the way they set up this twist. There are fights with Five where Five goes, how'd you get over there? How'd you do that? But they don't draw so much attention to it that's like an obvious reveal. Love her interplay with Diego. Love the sense of betrayal that it causes Diego. Just excellent new addition. And I even love her in season 3 despite other characters kind of like dropping the ball in my opinion. All right, next we have Ray Chestnut, another really good character. He is Allison's husband. Really fascinating, really interesting. I love that he is fleshed out past just being Allison's husband. He has his own goals, his own aspirations. I must say though, I do find his characterization a bit funny. There's this sequence where he's about to be a victim of police brutality and Allison caves and uses her power to tell a cop to basically not torture him, not be violent with him. And he gets really mad at Allison. Now, I was trying to wrap my head around this, and I know he's confused. I know he's concerned, but I was like, okay, there are 2 angles. He's either worried that Allison is like a double agent and secretly works with the police, similar to like a Judas and Black Messiah situation, or he thinks that Allison is like sleeping with a cop. Like, otherwise, I don't really get it. Like, it's like, he's like, what on earth did you say for the cop to let me go? Like, cops just aren't going to do that to black men. And I'm like, why are you mad about it? I get being a bit shocked and a bit frazzled, but this is like a big conflict. It's not just like a bit of a confused moment. He literally doesn't invite her to future civil rights things, civil rights meetups. Like, he starts icing her out. And I just thought it was slightly strange. I guess it's because he thought that she was working with the police. That's the only real explanation that makes sense to me, but it's just so weird that like he didn't, it's like she saved his life. I love that all it takes is a shopping spree for him to get over his hangups regarding her powers. Next we have the trio of hitmen. Look, cool visually. I love the way the story ends with them getting rumored, but aside from that, absolute wet noodles, wasted potential, really disappointed with the show. I think they either needed to give them less time so they were just these clinical menaces, or they need to give them more interesting interactions, because these solo scenes we get with the trio of assassins, these like Swedish looking people, just really didn't work for me. All right, next we have Sissy. Look, I did not like what Sissy represented. I never bought into the storyline properly. I do like what they do with Sissy and Harlan a lot more in season 3, but this didn't really work for me. The chemistry wasn't there. I did not like it. Didn't do it super well. Like, I like her as a character. She's a good person, sure. Like, she's fine. But I just wasn't super invested. And I thought the portrayal of her marriage with her husband was kind of a bit paper thin, one-dimensional, and I also thought the romance that she had with Victor just wasn't super great. The most interesting thing with Sissy is her relationship with Harlan and how Victor informs that and how the husband informs that. But aside from that, really didn't work for me in season 2. Sorry, like I wanted it to, it just didn't. Finally, we have Reginald Hargreeves. I love what they do with Reginald Hargreeves this season. I think this is the season where we find out properly that Reginald is an alien. I fucking love the reveal here too. Like that should feel like such a jump in the shark moment. Like it really should, but somehow the way it's done, the way it's handled is so good. I love that they're setting up this little secret society that he has going. I just, everything they did with Reginald this season was really interesting. I love the fights that he has with the siblings. He's like a really good fighter. I love that he's got Pogo, but like Pogo's mini. Just so good. Just so good. And I love that Reginald has become a really fleshed out character. I really like what they do with Reginald in season 3. Looks like season 4 is really going to knock it out of the park with Reginald. I just think what they're doing with Reginald and time travel and the way it informs the characters and their perception of him is infinitely fascinating. So good. While I'm here and while I've got you, I do just want to bring up one last thing that I absolutely love in this season, and it's the revelation that even though the timeline's changing and they're messing with things, it's still the type of time travel where certain things need to happen and loops need to be closed. Specifically, the moment with young 5 and old 5. I think that is really, really fascinating. Specifically, the stuff about the eyeball and like basically 5 and Luther and old 5 getting in a fight where they have to send old 5 into the portal, which we saw happen at the start of the show. That was a really neat revelation because I thought we were dealing with time travel where like the sequence of events we initially saw is completely erased and doesn't matter. So really neat that at the end of this season, it was revealed that no, actually, there are timelines that need to be preserved and events that need to happen. And I really like that the end of this season basically splits it. Instead of it being this circular loop, they are popping into a different timeline now. And that's where season 3 picks up. Oh, I will need to watch a few videos before talking about season 3 to double check how that exactly works. If anyone wants to let me know in the comments why it goes from that sort of one where things need to be fulfilled to a completely new timeline, let me know. Otherwise, I'll just rewatch some videos and get my head around it. Regardless, this has been my review for season 2 of The Umbrella Academy. I hope my hot takes weren't too hot. Let me know what you thought of the season. Let me know what you'd like me to talk about next. And thank you so much for watching. Have a lovely day.